From the green-filtered wastes to the snowy vampire-infested nightmare and now modern-day London, old Abe certainly keeps finding himself in sticky situations, doesn't he? Well, as this is the 6th time the former president is having to get his hands dirty because every time I make a joke about this man, people immediately demand videos around him, I don't think we need to go too in-depth on the rules. Same as always, axes, rifles and bare fists are all fair game in terms of defending myself, given the man's life and background. Plus, having the nickname Honest Abe means we must never tell a lie. Not that there is much of that to go around here anyway. There aren't exactly slaves to free here per se in Bloodborne, but again, I made a reference to it, people asked for it, and as such, here we are. Basically just me playing through Bloodborne with an axe. Not something too difficult I assume, but the real kicker for me is this is the first time I have picked up and played this game in 5 years. So, needless to say, I am more than likely going to be incredibly rusty. Should make for a good time. Now, with all that out of the way, let's begin. Fortunately, when it comes to the character creator, I decide to take a page out of the evilest man in Britain's book, as here's one I made earlier. He looks a little bit basic, but trust me, the look gets properly rounded out once we get the top hat. For a background, I figured Violent Past made the most sense, given what has led to this point. I feel it's hard to argue against. Things get weird as a bloody werewolf emerges from the floorboards, only to instantly retreat after laying eyes on our luscious facial hair. We are then embraced by Congress, before finally waking up and getting into the thick of it. No weapons yet, but that's alright. For the time, I can just two-hand my fist. Sounds silly, but I've watched enough Dragon Ball Z to know that few things are more devastating than a well-executed double axe handle. Case in point, look how it just ruins the day of this wolf when I land a fully charged one into its back, followed by Lincoln tickling its lower spinal column. The fists on their own aren't great sadly, so using them for the whole game isn't really an option. Well, it is, but I'd be a psychopath to do that, given that the axe is also at our disposal. That said, I do still use them to beat down the first couple of basic enemies, or rather, I continue using them to fish for easy visceral attacks. Also, if the footage looks a little jumpy to you, don't worry, that's on my end. I recorded up until the fight with Gascoin with my old capture card, which, as I said in that post from a few weeks ago, was on its last legs. Things get a lot smoother after that boss fight and I start using a new one. Hey, Nerbit from the future here. Disregard most of what I just said about the choppy footage. Yeah, it was like that, but I looked further on in to around about 20 minutes past this point, and this is what it looked like. Yeah, so not gonna have that for the first 5 minutes of the video, so instead I just went back and started a new profile and redid the intro section. What that means is some of the commentary might not exactly sync up exactly with what's happening, but what can you do? Anyway, back to the video. Anyway, it's not long before we can touch the nearby lantern and get taken to the hunter's dream. Here we can get our axe and blunderbuss, as well as meet Gurman, who, as far as we're concerned for now, is just a nice older gentleman telling us to brutally slaughter whatever we come across. Works for me, back to where we left off, and it's Abe in the city, as I begin systematically cutting down the infected villagers. Not much trouble yet, it is the introductory level after all. That said, when I decided to shake some of the rust off and practice parrying with my new gun, I, for whatever reason, figured the best sparring partner would be this other individual with an axe. I suppose I felt a sense of kinship. Well, unlike the president, he is most definitely not using that thing to cut down trees. While I successfully landed one parry on the man, I unfortunately pressed the L1 button and transformed my axe into the long axe halberd style. As it is two-handed, this means I lose the ability to parry, I then start panic rolling, and am rightfully slapped right back to the hunter's dream. This is going to be a long night. Well, I've got nothing to lose at this point, plus that thing now has my blood echoes, or souls for all you Dark Souls aficionados such as myself, who still use that game's terminology when referring to FromSoft's newer games. So I head straight back, make sure to not switch up the weapon, and stick to learning the parry window. Can't tell if it's the years of not playing or the fact I almost always take the hunter's pistol, but it took me longer than I would have hoped to get the timing right. With my XP back, I get to thinning out the locals. Compared to all the other Souls games, Bloodborne throws a decent number of enemies at you right at the start, probably to force the player into the hyper-aggressive gameplay style that it rewards. That said, throwing dogs at you this early is just straight up cruel. I don't know what it is, but dog enemies and their reskins are always some of the most annoying mobs to deal with. At least we ain't at Dark Souls 3 yet. Those ones straight up just teleport to you when they're off screen. Fortunately, I do have a gun. Yeah, its range leaves a lot to be desired, given that it's a blunderbuss and I'm probably just shooting whatever I can shove into the damn thing. But one direct hit from it will stop the hounds right in their tracks, normally leaving them open for some axe-related brain surgery. Sure, if they were really annoying me, I could just run past them as I know where I must go. That said, I always try to kill everything at least once when I play Souls-likes. Couldn't tell you why. Suppose the added experience doesn't hurt though. Well, what I faced next made those former dogs look like puppies, as now it's time for some wolves. Are they technically werewolves? I'm honestly not sure. I know Gascoin fits that description better, but these things certainly aren't your average breed, that's all I'm saying. Fighting them both at once in my current sucking state seemed like a poor choice, so I opted to make use of a few Molotovs I procured to try and lure them out one at a time. It kinda worked. Really, I should have known that the fire from the cocktail would lay on the big damage, but that wasn't my intention. Ended up dragging them both in anyway, so it was back to parrying, which I was fortunately having better luck at here than previously. With them put down, I could make my way to the first boss at the end of the bridge, but Grandpa was off his meds again, so I had to pay him a social call to make sure he wouldn't turn any of the neighbours into Swiss cheese. I also took the time to open up all the shortcuts in the area, so I would now have a straight shot through from the first lantern all the way to the first two bosses. It's here where I have a brief chat with one of the few non-hostile locals who essentially just points me in the direction I was already going. I suppose he is there for new players should they get lost, which is incredibly ironic if you ask me, because not only do I think Bloodborne is rather straightforward in its level design early on, but I also completely missed this man on my first few playthroughs way back when. Right, enough lollygagging, first boss time, and it's the Cleric Beast, a boss who I feel at this point is more famous for the memes it spawned as opposed to the fight itself. It's entirely optional of course, but the boss is so easy that fighting it at any point after this is comparable to bullying. That's not to say this entire fight was just completely in my favour, far from it. He can still easily kill you if you're not prepared. However, sticking close to him, preferably behind, and just hacking away with your weapon of choice tends to win you the fight with no trouble. Maybe I'm just lucky, but he doesn't seem to have many, if any, attacks that quickly reposition him to fend you off if you're planted firmly in his buttocks, so in other words, just keep circling and slashing until the fight is won. He managed to grab me at one point, but even that didn't do a whole lot, or at least nothing I couldn't just get back with a rally feature or a well-timed heal. So within 2 minutes or so, I land the final blow and get a badge that is ultimately pointless for this run. On the bright side, with the Cleric Beast defeated when I next return to the Hunter's Dream, I can level up, which is certainly appreciated. Rather than go in depth on my leveling throughout the run, I will lay it all out for you right now. My axe mainly scales with strength, so the plan is to get to around 50 and then split the rest of my points after that between vitality for more health and endurance for more stamina, so probably just under 30 points in each. The real highlight of my trip back is that I was able to scrounge up 3 bloodstone shards, meaning Lincoln can get himself a sharper +1 axe. All manner of monsters and trees best fear what lies in wait for them before the night's end. Getting back on track, kind of, I make a brief stop at the clinic to meet Yusefka through a door, not really important at all, but we may circle back to this later, who knows. The next area we are unfortunately running towards is the sewers. While it is odd for one of the game's first areas to be that of the sewer level, something most people detest, we can at least breathe a sigh of relief as Miyazaki was clearly in a good mood the morning he came up with this zone, as thankfully it's not poisonous. That part comes later. All in all, it is rather forgiving. Most of the enemies here either have obviously telegraphed attacks that can be easily parried, or they are crippled and can't do much other than aggressively crawl at you. Something I can easily abuse whole hordes of them with is a well-placed charge heavy from the Axe's long mode. To add to the benefit of spelunking in the sewers, I was able to get 5 more bloodstones, which should be just enough to go to +2. I also found a new fit which I'll be wearing for the time, at least until we get our proper attire in the next few minutes. Before proceeding out of the sewers towards the next boss, I decide to run around and deal with every major and minor encounter, such as meeting Eileen the Hunter and the old woman to start their quests, although the latter of which I will need to return to, as well as meeting Father Gascoigne's kids and agreeing to help them find their parents. I wasn't able to get the charged heavy attack off on the back of the sewer piggy, so no haha funny rectal exam jokes today, although the night is still young. As per usual, when climbing the ladder that takes us just outside the boss room, we witness this fine specimen off himself, as I suppose Yharnam doesn't understand how physics works. Finally, onto the fight with Gascoin, and it's not really the elegant dance of 2 well-classed hunters that you might expect. Who am I kidding? We've all been watching my gameplay so far, nobody was thinking that. Not helping matters is the fact we both came with the exact same weapons. Normally, I'd suggest one of us goes home and changes, but not to worry, Gascoin will fix that 2/3 into the fight. The whole ordeal felt like two idiots circling one another, just trying, and failing I might add, to get even a single parry off on each other. I did get a couple to be fair, although definitely not enough to warrant the number of bullets I wasted in the nearby tombstones. Gascoin wasn't without his tricks however, by which I mean the weapon itself. It seems he was aware of the fact that the halberd mode's long horizontal swings, in tandem with Bloodborne's level geometry not stopping your weapon in its tracks like other Souls games, allowed him to effectively hit me through solid objects. I would complain about this, but while old Abe may be honest in terms of his speech, that does not mean he is above using some good old-fashioned cheese when the need arises. Just in case someone brings it up, yes, I spoke to his kids beforehand. I do have the music box at my disposal should I wish to stun him a couple of times to make the fight more manageable. However, I opt not to do that. And no, this isn't one of those weird Souls player flexes where people complain that you aren't a real player, you didn't beat the boss naked with your hands behind your back while your dick was in a sandwich press. No, I simply just find it more fun without the music box. When Gascoin finally does go full furry, I attempted to get a parry as I know the following visceral attack would have nearly killed him outright. Sadly, my timing still sucks, so in the end I just landed 2 back-to-back heavy swings, followed up by 1 light attack to win the fight. I also grabbed the brooch while I'm here, along with the ability to start slotting gems into my weapons. I'm not a complex man when it comes to gems, by the way. If it makes my damage go up, I likey. I know the brooch here also has a gem in it that I can retrieve by smashing the thing, but I promised to return it to the kids, so if I were to keep the thing, that would technically count as a lie, and we can't have that. Before I return the brooch, however, I make sure to proceed up the nearby ladder to the chapel and progress the night. All that really means is it progresses some character quest lines as well as potentially changing some enemy placements. I chat with the sentient puddle who tells me that the chapel is a safe place that protects against the beasts and that I am welcome to invite anyone I come across back here. But more importantly about progressing to this stage is just outside the chapel, we can find this corpse and just like that, bam, full outfit acquired. Now that I am dressed for the occasion, I do just as I said I would and return the locket to the children to varying degrees of success, as well as convince the old woman from before to come to the chapel. Oh, and the talking window from before gives me a flamethrower for putting Gascoin out of his misery. Neat. My next main objective is to head up to the nearby Cathedral and have a chat with the vicar there. Like many things though, I am choosing to put that off for a while as I go and explore every other area that I can as of right now. This means I am not going to be spending the 10k blood echoes on the emblem to open the door. Sure, it is the fastest and most direct way to access that part of the map, but if I'm planning on just doing everything anyway, I'll be making my way up there eventually via a different route, so the 10k echoes would just be a waste in the end. I may also just be a cheapskate, as I never buy the Crest of Artorias from Andre either when playing Dark Souls, instead just opting to take the ladder by the Hydra. Back to what's happening on screen, I head down this side path to fight some rather tall gentlemen. They honestly look a lot tougher than they really are. A few well-placed fully charged heavy swings makes them complete pushovers. The real reason I'm down here is because there's one of these things. Killing it before it has time to disappear gets me 3 more bloodstone shards, allowing my axe to reach +3 the next time I head back to the Hunter's Dream. I made sure while I was in the area to pick up the Tempering Blood gemstone in the nearby chest, the one next to the door that never unlocks. For those of you curious, it just leads out to the bridge right where I fought the Cleric Beast. Only other path open to me right now is down to the church area that leads to Old Yharnam. It's more of the same humanoid enemies we've been slaughtering in droves, so no trouble getting there, although they do have more dogs, so I can't let my guard down too much. It's here where we also meet Alfred, a potential summons for certain boss fights, and all around nice guy as far as I'm concerned. I decided not to use any summons this go around, mainly because they tend to make me suck at the game more. What I mean by that is when you fight a boss with a summon, the boss's attention is obviously split between the two of you, usually whoever's laying on the most damage. Well, because of this, I've found it always makes learning boss patterns for me a lot more difficult than it needs to be, as whenever they're ping-ponging back and forward, it makes it kinda hard to learn their patterns. Plus, it always gives the bosses more health to compensate the assist, which is perfectly fine, but I'd rather not turn some of these guys into damage sponges, you know? Descending into the belly of Old Yharnam, and we are greeted by another hunter. The major difference being, I am the prey. Most hunter fights will begin with them rushing you like crazy. This one, however, well, he decides to put that firearm tech to proper use, and just attempts to mow me down in a turret segment. Fortunately, this is just one of those times where I must remind myself of the first true scholar of the Souls series, and practice the teachings of good old Sir Biscuit. The actual beasts here are rather squishy, and afraid of fire to boot, So putting a torch in my left hand all but completely trivializes any encounters that Abe should find himself in. Snake eatering my way up to the hunter, and I won't lie, I tried the old cheese method of immediately unloading bullets into him so he falls off the tower. Unfortunately, you need a weapon that actually has some form of range, something the blunderbuss does not have. So it's an old-fashioned hunter duel. My least favourite type of encounters in the game. Won't beat around the bush, it's because I suck at them. Never really messed around with PvP stuff in these games outside of Dark Souls 1 back in the day, so my skills, or lack thereof when it comes to fighting other character NPCs, is almost non-existent. Not helping matters is that for some reason in Bloodborne, the enemy hunters just have way more health than you would typically expect. I'm not complaining, mind you, it's not supposed to be easy, and in the end I welcome the challenge. I'm going on here like the dude wiped the floor with me. Far from it, in fact I got him first try here, it's just that the execution was incredibly sloppy. Much like Gascoin, my timing is way off at the start when trying to parry, so once more I'm wasting bullets all willy-nilly. When I do manage to land a shot and get a visceral, the damage leaves a lot to be desired. Although, to be fair, I'm not fishing for them because I thought they could hurt. No, rather I'm doing so because they push him back a fair amount, making it easier to once more attempt to push him to his death. A second visceral doesn't quite do the trick, but thanks to him not trying to roll out of the way, I'm able to land a fully charged R2 with the transformed axe that is notorious for how much pushback it does, and sure enough, he now must contend with the hardest boss of all, gravity. With him out of the way, Abe makes his way into the nearby building, where once more he continues to treat the weakened beast folk like they are trees ready to be log cabinified. It's the same beasts as before, so while they outnumber me by a large margin, they are still relatively weak to compensate. Once I'm through, I can open up the way to the next boss, as well as a shortcut back to just before the ladder where I fought that hunter. And, against my better judgment, I went back that way as there is in fact a second hunter that you can fight here. He is nowhere near as tanky as Gatling Gary up on the tower, so even with less bullets and blood vials, this is a breeze. Helping matters is he is even more gun happy than I am. He spent most of the fight dancing around in the fog, taking random pot shots in my general direction, all the while not looking where he was going and repeatedly dashing into a nearby fire. He was the last major threat in the area, so I went and grabbed some optional clothes that I will never be allowed to wear, along with opening yet another shortcut, and then after a brief restock, made my way to the next boss. All of this build up for a boss that on its own isn't all that remarkable. The main gimmick here is supposed to be its passive poison effect is constantly spewing throughout the fight that only gets worse the more you hurt it. And yes, while that can be annoying as it effectively means antidotes are pointless, the main issue I have with the fight is that the thing appears to be on some sort of sugar high as it will just not sit still for the life of me. You can toss blood cocktails to help alleviate this problem because as the name blood-starved beast would imply, he is in fact hungry and craves the blood. Much like the Cleric Beast, staying behind and hacking away at his ankles works a treat, again assuming you can get him to sit still for a moment. Things only really start to heat up near the end of the fight once he gets more aggressive. It can make finding openings to heal a little difficult given that you're almost constantly going to be poisoned along with him running and jumping at you continuously. Just look at my health here. I came very close to kicking the bucket multiple times. Thankfully, I am still 3-0 on the bosses as once more I was able to come out on top with no deaths. Maybe Bloodborne isn't actually as hard as I remember. Here's hoping the rest of this goes just as smoothly. Now with BSB dead, we can get into some more fun side activities. For example, we now have access to this lift as killing that boss causes the previously locked doors to miraculously open. Not sure what the correlation is between those two events, but whatever. The short climb up the Healing Church workshop is just covered with more of the human beast men we've killed so many of, so nothing new here. I did get to squish another one of those running glob things. This one gave me 2 twin blood shards. This is good as they're the next materials I require for upgrading the axe. Before we get to the top, we need to go down this giant shaft. There are a couple of things here we need, so this won't be the first time we go jumping. The most important of which, if I'm being real, is grabbing the top hat accessory for my messengers, now they too can get in on the Lincolnisms. Falling to the street level and I'll need to contend with some new enemy types. First was this proper beastman, which, to be fair, I don't really have to fight as I get the charged R2 followed by a visceral for a near instant kill. One more close-up of the axe ends the fight before it can truly begin. Next are the sack carrying folk. Their main gimmick is that after you hit them once, they tend to buff up immediately and are considerably more powerful. With good parry timing and charge attacks, they can be exploited rather easily. They will be more important in just a bit, however, so we shall put a pin in this for now. Finally, for new disgusting creatures, we have this squid mouth abomination. All I can say about this thing was, despite my 5-year hiatus from the game, the moment I saw this one in the alley, it immediately triggered my fight or flight response. So that's cool. This time I went with the former and was able to come out on top without getting hit. With them out of the way, I can head up the nearby lift, which drops me just behind the gate outside the chapel, allowing me to open it from this side, unlocking a quick and convenient route to the next major boss, and as mentioned, effectively skipping the need to pay the toll of 10,000 blood echoes, which is always nice. Returning to the chapel, I head back up the lift, and this time to the tippy top of the workshop, where I must contend with more old men who should probably not have a firearms license. The reward for doing so is the Radiant Sword Hunter badge. This unlocks more items back at the Hunter's Dream. More stuff I can't use, mind you, but whatever. As for the big door here, well, it's locked for now and will remain that way until the last act of the game, so we will get back to that later. For now, I make the plunge once more, this time to safely land by this door and enter the abandoned old workshop, beginning the odd trend in FromSoft titles where you can find an alternate version of the unconnected hub area in the main world of the game. There's a couple of interesting items here. For one, we get the doll dress, not much to use as is, but it sells for a decent number of blood echoes, so could probably get a level or two out of it. We also get the hairpin, which can be handed over to the doll in the dream for a gem, always nice. And finally, we get a third umbilical cord.
Tasty.
Oh, there's also this old hunter's bone for a swanky new dodge animation with more iframes. Not something I bother to use personally, but certainly helpful if you're like me and tend to panic roll like an idiot from time to time. Right, back to the chapel as it's our current central zone, and now that the gate has been opened, we can head on down into the nearby housing estate where we can rescue 2 more villagers by telling them about said chapel. Well, in all honesty, we can only save Ariana. She will make it to the chapel no problem. The man here though, well, he always heads to the opposite of where you tell him. Thing is, he asked for a safe place, and we know Yuzefka's clinic is anything but, ergo we tell him to return to the chapel as it's the truth, ergo he does the opposite, ergo he now dabo dies. While continuing my exploration, I ended up getting ahead of myself as I found my way to the forest entrance. Right now I don't have the password, so I'll need to defeat the area boss and come back. As I am doing everything I can possibly think of, I met up with Eileen again and helped her hunt another hunter. Alright, I'll stop. It's the easiest hunter encounter in the run, given that you have backup for it. I just had to be careful not to accidentally cut Eileen in half when I was swinging like a madman. Also helping matters is that right before the fight I went and upgraded the axe to +4. Potentially a little overpowered for where I am right now, but let's not pretend like the other Lincoln runs were some kind of impossible challenge. The original used the Lincoln's repeater from Fallout 3 after all, a weapon that is often in consideration for best in the game. Next I was off to the Witches of Hemwick boss fight. Not too much on the way there other than Sniper Alley. I did get weirdly lucky with twin bloodstone drops though. By the time I got to the witches I had 10 of them, so another upgrade was on the horizon. The witches are a rather unremarkable boss. You just go in and have to search around the arena for them, as they are invisible until you get too close. The only difficulty here is they summon these other creatures that slowly patrol around the arena to fight you. There is a fun cheese method here where if you leave the boss fight and spend all of your insight upon your return, they won't be able to summon these enemies, meaning you can just beat up the witches with no issue. Thing is, this boss fight is already easy enough as is, and that would be overkill. Plus I beat them on my first try, so never even had the opportunity to show that method off. After emerging victorious, we can grab the Rune Workshop tool. It lets us use runes. I know, who would have guessed? Runes are just different passive effects that you can acquire, and you can have up to 3 of them active at once, plus a specific Covenant-based rune in the 4th slot. Mainly, it's stuff like being able to heal off viscerals, more stamina, health, bullets, etc. Like gems in my weapons, I'm rather basic when it comes to runes, so I'm usually okay with the extra stamina and visceral healing. Although, certain ones can buff specific defenses, which can come in handy during certain stressful situations. Time for more optional side stuff because I'm still quite the completionist. This time we are going to die on purpose, and I do mean that. I am not trying to cover for a fragile ego. By getting big booted in the face by those sack carriers from before, we can let them do their best Santa Claus impression as they stuff us into their magical sack and whisk us away to parts unknown. The place in question being the world's worst prison, seeing how they have left all of the doors unlocked. We can rescue another survivor while we're here, thanks to the power of Gascoin's scarf. Not to jump the gun a bit, but she's a bit of a bitch and a potential murderer, so we'll need to keep an eye on her. The main event here is Dark Beast Parl. He's a big electric bone dog, which, when I say it out loud, sounds like a sick name for a band. Anyway, his whole shtick is that he has osteoporosis because FromSoft love making big dog fights that inflict us with more emotional than physical trauma. Well, due to his weakened bones, it only takes a few swings into his legs to knock him flat in his face. At this point, you can essentially just keep going from leg to leg to stun lock him into an easy win. I decided to be classy and finish him off with a running heavy swing to the head. Unfortunately, he lived with a sliver of health, so I had to awkwardly get in another hit to truly end the fight. The door behind him just leads to the area that housed the blood-starved beast, so not much more here. Well, there is another area the prison connects to, but other than picking up some new threads and a tonitrus, a tiny electric beating stick, there's not much else here for us right now. So without sounding like a broken record, this is somewhere we will return to later. Speaking of the tonitrus, we can actually see it in action as there's another hunter encounter nearby who uses one. The problem is that it's a 2-on-1 match, and I am quickly put in my place. Own fault really, should have been more aggressive. Next try, and I'm able to sneak up on one of the hunters and start the fight off with a charge attack and visceral combo to bring him down to near half health. Annoying thing about the second hunter is that he's more long range support than all out brawler, so he starts giving me a run for my money in the wasting bullets department. All this gunfire eventually gets the attention of the tonitrus wielder, so it's back to the handicap match. I figured I could lure them to the roof of the nearby building, as then I would be able to hopefully knock one of them off while fighting. The fall wouldn't kill either of them of course, but it would hopefully be enough to separate them briefly to make things more manageable. Well, to my surprise, I was clearly overthinking things it seems, as the rifleman chose not to chase after me up the path, so while not how I intended, I still got my 1v1. The fight went about how I expected from here, if I'm honest.
Miss! Miss! Miss!
First try.
As for Shooter McGavin, well, not only did he not follow us up the stairs, but it turns out he de-aggroed and returned to his default position. So, while cheesy, I just once again snuck up behind him, and I guess due to these two hunters not having any blood vials, was able to capitalise on his still low health and end the fight with a single sneaky charged attack. Alright, as far as I'm concerned, that was the last optional thing I could do for now, so it's finally time to tackle the area boss, Vicar Amelia, and oh boy, am I definitely overpowered for this. At this stage, I have a level 6 weapon, something that you probably shouldn't have for what is only the second mandatory boss in the game. I've also just gotten enough blood echoes to the point where I've probably leveled so much that my base defenses are just higher than what they should be as well. After all, her attacks are clearly not hitting anywhere near as hard as they should. I didn't really have any strategy when rocking up to this fight other than trying to hit her head when possible. Like many of the beast bosses, enough hits to the face results in them being opened up for a visceral. Granted, it only ever happened once in the fight, but still, better than nothing. Other than that, I just treated her like any other boss so far, stuck relatively close, and just kept hacking away where I could. The camera got a little iffy during the fight once she backed into the corner, but you see, I'm someone whose second favourite game of all time is Sonic Adventure, a game that's camera is a physical object that can quite literally get stuck on the scenery, so claustrophobic angles like the one in this fight mean absolutely nothing to me. With the beast slain, I give the nearby skull a wee poke, and from doing so get a flashback to Lawrence and Master Wilhelm. This results in me learning the password for the door that leads to the forest that I brought up before. Returning and repeating the phrase opens the way, and poor old Lincoln is immediately put to shame by the sheer size of this undead boy's top hat. It's not the size of one's top hat, but how you use it that's important. But can't deny, with something that big, he may have been able to shield himself from a particular killing blow. The beginning of the woods is straightforward enough, nothing I haven't already fought before really. Like many of Bloodborne's areas, we could be in and out of here in less than 30 minutes if I just made my way along the intended path to the next major boss. But where's the fun in that? I make a detour to this seemingly unimportant building where I can talk with somebody inside, and in doing so, receive their tonsils. I would be more weirded out by this, but considering the game's most infamous boss is essentially a weird skinny white guy who beats you with his placenta, this seems like just the norm if I'm honest. There's also somewhat of a mini-boss in the forest that I wanted to fight, and it's none other than this fine specimen. While he may look like just another man down on his luck looking for a place to stay the night, don't let his meagre frame fool you, he is actually a beast in disguise. If we were to send him back to the chapel, he would very quickly begin systematically killing off all the others whom we've sent there. So, to deal with this before it becomes a problem, old Abe just starts chopping. I wouldn't say he's a terribly hard encounter, granted I couldn't remember any of his moves and therefore got tossed around like a ragdoll for most of the fight, but despite that I was still able to come out on top without much hassle. The trick seemed to be not locking onto him, as rolling around always just worked better. In the end, I finished him off with a well-timed albeit pitiful shot while he was in the air. For my troubles, he drops the Beast rune, something we won't be making use out of because I'm not really sure where the run stands on using Beast pellets. But I figured if I didn't use the werewolf mode in Skyrim, then I wouldn't use this transformation either. Even if it's not really a full transform and instead just a consumable that makes you deal and receive more damage. Regardless, with him out of the picture, I quickly explore the rest of the rundown village area here and locate the shortcut back to the nearest lamp and entrance to the forest. I also find this gentleman with a bucket on his head, so that's neat. With the shortcut opened, I returned to the area near where I grabbed the tonsils and could take a somewhat hidden path down into a brief poison lake because I guess the developers can't help themselves. Fortunately, there is nothing of worth here, so we can just jog on through to the nearby ladder, and after exclaiming what a thrill this ladder climb was, I found myself back at the clinic from the beginning of the run. The only major difference is this time we are on the other side of the previously locked gate. From here, we can then open said gate, allowing easy access to this part of the building. By going this way, we can enter the top floor of the clinic and get some new items, the most important of which is the Cainhurst summons. Now, I'm not quite sure when you're supposed to head to Castle Cainhurst, like I can't remember if it's supposed to be a late game area or not, but at this point I just said to hell with it and packed up my bags and decided to go on a road trip. Considering we could see the castle off in the distance at the lake from before and that bridge was completely gone, I can only assume that the horses pulling the carriage can either fly or have the Jesus perk to run on water. Regardless of how they got us there, it seems we may have been on a bit of a snooze cruise, as by the time we come to, yes, we are at the castle, but our horses appear to have frozen to death. Remember how I was just wondering if the castle was a late game area or not? Well, upon immediately entering the grounds, I am swiftly eaten by worms. So there's your answer. Abraham Lincoln fact number 10. Considering the real Lincoln died nearly 200 years ago, it's highly likely he too has also been eaten by worms, making this particular death lore accurate. Next go, I realise the sweep move in the transformed state is the best way to safely take out the worms. Keeps them far enough away so that they don't get cozy with my innards, plus it's quick enough that I can cancel it into a roll to back off should I miss. Look at me spending all this time talking about the worms, all the while just as, if not more, annoying enemy is right next to them. These blood-sucking freaks hit like trucks and can be quick to boot. The only saving grace here is that the axe can stun lock them rather easily, so if I manage to get behind them, and assuming I have enough stamina, I tend to always come out on top. Making it inside the castle, and wonderfully, I procure more weapons in fashion I cannot use due to my stipulations. Honestly, scaling the castle is rather straightforward. Sure, it's filled with things that want to kill you, because what area isn't, but the main enemy you fight are these semi-invisible women with very short-range knives. Sure, they can lay on the pain like crazy if they get close enough, but much like the worms, we can solve that by just not letting them get close enough. Also, my suspicions are confirmed rather quick that this is indeed supposed to be a somewhat late game area as I start finding bloodstone chunks. These are the final set of materials I'll need to get the axe to +9, leaving only the blood rock to maximise it to 10. Of course, there aren't enough chunks in Cainhurst to get me to +9 right now, but just figured I would bring it up. In fact, it was only enough to upgrade it once to +7. Still, that's pretty strong, especially considering I still haven't dealt with the boss in the Forbidden Woods. Back to Cainhurst, and like I said, other than the screaming ladies, not much of worth stands in our way. There are some gargoyles who get their kicks by pretending to be statues, but that's nothing a lock-on won't fix. Speaking of, I kinda feel bad when I beat on the gargoyles. If you get in a strong enough hit, they kinda just flop over and start wriggling around on the ground, completely defenseless. At that point, I'm sorta just putting them out of their misery, you know? Anyway, on to the boss of the area, and it's Martyr Lugarius. He's more of a ranged fighter, at least for the first phase, as he'll spam the red skull magic whenever he gets a chance. Granted, as I learned the hard way, that won't stop him from beating you senseless with his scythe if you get within range. So yeah, I had a very embarrassing first attempt as he just pummeled me into the side of the roof within half a minute of me entering the arena. Second try and things go a little better. For one, I last long enough to see more of his first phase and figure out something of a battle plan. The most annoying thing he can do, again aside from the whole backing away like a chicken thing, is that he can summon a massive skull at point blank, seemingly instantaneously, which not only knocks me back setting him up for more ranged bullshit, but also knocks a sizable portion off of my health. On the bright side, I did learn that due to the axe's charged heavy swing being a downward slam, even if I wasn't able to position myself behind him to open him up for a visceral, I could still pancake him if I managed to hit him with a fully charged R2 anywhere else. Mind you, he recovers fast enough that I seemingly can't trap him like this, but it did do good damage and allowed me either time to heal or to reposition myself out of the way of an impending counterattack. Despite all this, I still don't make it to phase 2 as I got stuck behind him in a piece of the roof, causing me to get immediately obliterated by an incoming magic burst. They say third time's the charm, and whoo boy, did they mean it. When I entered this time, my plan was to just stay up in his face as much as possible and just parry him as much as I could. Simple strategy, but you know what, it worked so unbelievably well. I broke his guard about 10 times in total, and I believe I landed a visceral 8 of those times. As you can imagine, that wore his health bar down mighty quick. It got easier in phase 2 as well if you're wondering, as he tends to get more aggressive with his melee attacks, which of course just led to more parry opportunities. I think a big problem I had was I was playing the fight far too defensively before. In my defense, I was just coming off beating Shadows of the Erdtree for the first time, so I guess that DLC's final boss had me playing in a very roll-heavy defensive mindset. Anywho, with Lugarius dead, I briefly slip on his crown to reveal a hidden doorway, because that's just how these games work. Heading through, we find the Queen of the Vilebloods. Say no more, that sounds like vampires to old Abe. Although I know someone else who wants her dead far more than us. Remember Alfred? I won't blame you if you don't. Well, by grabbing the nearby unopened invitation, we can then take it back to him in Yharnam, to which he will congratulate us for doing so. Once that is done, we can return to the Queen's chamber to find that Alfred may have gone completely mad, as he appears to have beaten her into a bloody pulp with nothing but a wheel, all the while wearing a traffic cone on his head. He seems rather ecstatic about the whole thing, which is great. Always nice to see an NPC questline have a rather happy ending for one. Oh no. Well, I'm off to the forest to cry myself to sleep. You guys want anything? I spent a little time grabbing some extra items scattered around, but they weren't really needed. So before long, I was already at our next boss, and it becomes clear right away that I am a tad overpowered. To be fair, the Shadows of Yharnam are like the epitome of judging a book by its cover. Like, when you walk in, you assume you're going to fight 3 Ringwraith lookalikes, when in reality, you're about to battle the 3 Stooges. The Shadows, at least from my experience, rarely try to jump you all at once. To be fair, my transformed axe is exceptionally good at hitting them all at the same time. Not to mention, the fully charged swing sends them all flying in different directions, which certainly helps to focus down one at a time by splitting up the pack. Even still, they don't inflict a lot of damage, especially for this point in the game, which is kind of the halfway mark if you've been skipping over all the optional stuff. Didn't necessarily have a plan for this one either, other than walking in and spamming sweep attacks, if I'm honest. I mean, it works like a treat, so go me. Once enough of their health has been drained, they enter phase 2. This is indicated by snakes growing out of them. It looks intimidating, and they are technically more powerful than before, but don't let that scare you. Any strategy you had before can continue to work just as well. After the first one goes down with the sweeping, I focus on the one with the sword. The reason being, this one suffers from what I can only assume is a bug, as every time you hit him, he will just dodge backwards. So you can simply hit him, wait for the dodge, then walk up and hit him again. This will get him stuck in a cycle you can very easily abuse until his death. I would like to have mentioned some kind of plan for the third and final Shadow, but that problem managed to resolve itself when he got himself stuck in some nearby gravestones, allowing me to just wail on him for the most brain-dead kill of the bunch. With them dead, I do another round of spending blood echoes, and for those of you curious, I am now level 64 with my main stats being 30 vitality, 24 endurance, and 38 strength. Arriving in Bergenworth, which is really just a single building behind the Shadows boss arena, and we are immediately assaulted by weird fly people. Honestly, they ain't too bad. No, what is messing me up is those guys I mentioned earlier, you know, the ones who triggered my fight or flight response. Turns out they don't stun easily, and my biggest mistake was thinking otherwise. Their stun attack lasts so long that it is all but guaranteed that they will follow it up with their slurpy attack that does a crap ton of damage, as well as stealing some of your insight. I suppose the bright side here is that I was able to hurt this one enough that when he was done, I was able to finish him off rather quickly with 2 more hits. Making it inside the building, and we are greeted by yet another hunter fight. This one stands out by not adhering to the dress code of all black. This is also our first NPC battle with someone who has weaponized the power of H.P. Lovecraft, and as a result, can fire lasers and batter us with Cthulhu tentacles. It makes her more dangerous than most, as I'm almost certain that a direct hit from the meteor shower looking attack could almost one-shot me. The tentacle slap is a bit more manageable. Sure, it deals a ton of damage for a single attack, but as long as I keep topped up, it shouldn't be able to one-shot me. I tried parrying her exclusively for a bit, but I was getting nowhere and once again overcomplicating the fight. You see, she doesn't have a traditional firearm in her left hand, opting instead for, I don't know, was that a can of deodorant? Regardless, she cannot parry me, so the winning play was to just rush her and never stop swinging. With no real defensive methods and seemingly lacking the ability to comprehend the dodge button, this works a treat. And, for good measure, I ended up finishing her with a parry anyway, so I feel great. After finding the key that leads to the balcony, we can find Cut Content McGee, who just groans and points at the lake. Considering I cannot swim, I return to the Hunter's Dream to momentarily restock my vials and bullets. Returning, I dive straight into the water to find out it was of course only the water ceiling and that my next boss fight takes place on the water floor. Silly of me, really. Rom, the incy-wincy spider who is back for blood, is initially passive towards you until you land your first hit, at which point all hell breaks loose. It's entirely possible, with good timing, damage and skill, that you can 2-cycle or potentially 1-cycle this boss, resulting in an incredibly quick and easy fight. I lacked 2 of those aspects, and I'll give you a hint, my damage output is quite good. The worst part about Mama Shortlegs here is that every time she teleports away, she brings in the grandkids to straighten you out. The sheer number of them, combined with the shocking amount of damage they can output, along with them being incredibly resistant to physical attacks from a front-on assault, leads to a frustrating situation. I can either stay and thin out the odds, knowing she will no doubt spawn more in time, or I can say to hell with it and just rush Rom and attempt to end the fight before I'm overwhelmed. Well, on the first attempt I went with option 2, and the fact I just called it my first attempt should indicate how well that went. Next go, I figured if it ain't broke, don't fix it, despite the fact it did not work the first time, and that I most certainly should have fixed it. Alright, slow and steady it is. The plan was to just focus on the 8-legged freaks while also not going too aggressive, as I wanted to make sure I had enough stamina to dodge any incoming projectiles from Rom. Circling the mini spiders to hit them in their weak spot was actually easier than expected. Best of all was if I stayed at a medium distance, they would sometimes do this jump attack where they slam their heads into the ground. It was an almost guaranteed instant kill if it hit me, but if I dodged out of the way, they were left incredibly vulnerable. In fact, all of them went down rather quick, assuming I didn't hit their heads. I thought that Rom would instantly teleport away once her minions were defeated, but thankfully that wasn't the case, so I was free to lay the smackdown. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending how you look at it, I was able to get her to half health before she retreated. It's good because, well, half her health is gone, obviously. However, it was bad as it caused her to technically teleport twice, therefore summoning 2 waves of spiders instead of just 1. I ended up just running for the second wave. Figured if I took them out quick enough, I may be able to finish off the boss before the other spiders got close. This kind of worked how I figured. Like before, I dealt with the surrounding ones while keeping Rom in my sights, and then switched up to quick hit and run tactics on Rom whenever she looked like she was open and wasn't going to use herself as a rolling pin on me. Turns out this was the winning play. Eventually, she started charging up one of her ranged attacks, so I used the opportunity to sprint in and get the final hit that I needed, not only winning the fight, but probably having my smoothest, albeit slowest, fight with her ever. A seemingly random crying woman then spawns in the distance, and approaching her causes us to notice the nearby blood moon. After, I am then teleported to the big door behind those 2 hunters that I cheesed before the Amelia fight. I run through to grab the lantern, but for now we have other problems to contend with. First off is Eileen. She seems to have run into a spot of bother once again, facing down another hunter. Things are certainly looking worse for our feathered friend, as she appears to be sitting on a big old pile of strawberry jam. Due to the stickiness of said jam, she is currently glued to the pavement, so I offer to help with the situation, which was a mistake. Most hunter NPCs tend to be somewhat difficult encounters, or at least they test your skills more than your average group of enemies. Well, I guess someone at FromSoft figured they weren't hard enough, so in walks this asshole with his absurd amount of health, damage output, and a katana. The katana is only a big deal given that I am stuck with the axe, to be fair. What I mean is that he is quicker than me, so if we both attack at around the same time, I am losing that trade 100% of the time. Which is something I could not afford to do, as that sword would 2-shot me if I wasn't careful. That said, trying to stay out of his range and bait attacks that way wasn't exactly the smartest play either, considering his pistol gets to function like a real one, meaning getting clipped with the damn thing near takes me out as well. By far, this was the most difficult opponent I had faced yet. And to reiterate, given how much I suck at hunter fights, I would go as far to say this is probably the hardest fight in the base game for me. And hell, it's technically not even a boss. I died 6 times to him, but to be honest, the worst part was that after the 4th death, I realised I was beginning to run out of blood vials. It was bound to happen sooner or later, given that these weren't quick kills, in that the fights were lasting long enough to drain most of my resources. The silver lining here is that I had a feeling this could happen sooner or later, so I have some consumable blood echoes on standby that I can use to purchase some more vials from the shop back in the dream. Plus, the damn run back from the chapel, as annoying as it may be, the enemies on the way do have a decent chance to drop more vials, so there's that too. Speaking of vials, did I mention that he has one that he likes to pop when you drop him below half? Because he does, and it's a right kick in Lincoln's little precedence. The only strategy I had to swing things in my favour was to try and let him transform his weapon and have him stay in that state for as long as possible. You see, the alternate mode for the katana gains new moves and powers itself up with the user's blood, meaning so long as he is using it like so, he will gradually lose health over time. It ticks pretty slow, yeah, but it can add up, especially if he does any of the flashier moves, as they can drain a lot of health in a few short seconds. The other benefit to us is that when he goes into this mode, he has to two-hand the sword. As you'd expect, that means the pistol goes away, and I don't have to worry about getting riddled with bullets or parried, allowing me to be a tad more aggressive. I'm not sure if there's a way to force him into this state at will, but I find that backing off and being kinda passive seem to trigger him to switch, probably because the AI realizes he is out of harm's way and won't get interrupted mid-transform, I guess. On my final attempt, it probably sounds obvious, but it all just came down to recognizing his patterns. He was rather trigger happy in the early stages of the fight for whatever reason, but thankfully after he used his only blood vial, that seemed to stop. I was beginning to land more parries by this point as well. I would say consistently, but my diminishing quicksilver bullets would say otherwise. Landing a visceral also led to some free damage afterwards. If I partially charged a heavy attack, I could hit him as he was getting up. I tried fully charging it a few times, or light attacks, but he always seemed to just dodge right out of the way when I did those. Speaking of heavy attacks, in the end that was his downfall. Not me, him doing them. See, he kept trying to do them, and as you might expect, the long charge time is what opened him up for those final few parries. A couple extra hits for good measure, and Lincoln emerged victorious. Leaving the church, I speak with Eileen one final time, to which her dialogue can be summed up as, "I'm too old for this shit," and then she dies, because, much like Alfred, no one gets a happy ending in London. With that out of the way, I had one more little side objective to crack, and it involved using that tonsil stone we grabbed earlier. By returning to the door we got transported to after the fight with Rom, we can get manhandled by one of the big creatures. Doing so gets us transported to my least favourite place on the planet. School. Seeing how I had an overall attendance in school in the low 80s and Lincoln was homeschooled, neither of us had any business being here, so we just book it straight for the exit. Book it. Education humour. Things weren't much better, as once we emerge, we find ourselves in the Nightmare Frontier, which, to be entirely honest, is probably one of the easiest areas we've wandered into yet, bar one specific enemy type anyhow. I'm able to cut a path through everything in my way without breaking a sweat, which makes sense seeing how I've had the tonsil stone from pretty much the second I set foot in the woods. Meaning I was probably supposed to come here before the Shadows and Rom boss fights, and definitely long before I went to Castle Cainhurst and fought Logarius. This fact is all but confirmed by the abundance of twin bloodstone shards I'm finding scattered throughout the nightmare. I outgrew those upgrades hours ago. My hubris gets the best of me when I follow the glowing candy trail and get pushed off a cliff by Spider Patches, who, when I say that name out loud, I'm not picturing this, but rather this. Well, all I really have to contend with here is the poison, which is kinda just to be expected at this point if we're being real. Again, the enemies in the area may be visually monstrous, but a slight breeze in their general direction takes them out for the count. So, as it turns out, coming here isn't a complete waste of my time, as I was able to kill this bigger version of the little boys who've been dropping shards, and in doing so, got 2 more chunks. This, combined with the others I still had from Cainhurst, would be enough to get me to +8 once I returned to the Hunter's Dream. Alright, on to the spawn of nightmares, the Winter Lantern. Fortunately, the ones in the Nightmare Frontier have little health, so I can just rapidly attack them for easy kills. I got super lucky with the dodge on this one though, I will say. As for the frenzy effect that they build up on you by simply being in close proximity to them, well, I had planned ahead for that too. Remember the old woman near the start who we saved? Well, when we speak with her in the chapel after she grows to like us, she begins handing out sedatives which can be used to offset the frenzy effect. I was able to get enough before I came here to never truly be at risk of getting one shot by the lanterns, thankfully. Alright, boss time, and we now get to bully one of those amygdalas that we've seen just chilling all over the place. Again, I am way overleveled for this, so the fight barely lasts a few minutes. He takes next to no damage if you attack his legs, so standing behind and slicing his Achilles tendon is not an option today. Instead, to get max damage, like many things, you want to just focus his head. The best way I figured to do this was a running heavy attack with a transformed axe. A direct hit did 666 damage, and after landing it just a couple of times, I was able to break his guard and get a fairly strong visceral. His recovery time after this, along with him briefly raging out, allowed for even more high damaging follow-ups. By the time he was done and ready to transition into Phase 2, he was already close to death. As for Phase 2, well, he takes a page out of the Last Giant's playbook from Dark Souls 2, and figures the best way to get more range is to simply rip off his appendages and start using them as blunt instruments. It doesn't really pay off in the end. With the nightmare cleared, I can get back to the main plot. That has me fighting through Yahar'gul. Main gimmick here is that those enemies we've been fighting throughout the streets are now back with a vengeance, as they're all red now, and respawn after a set amount of time unless we find and deal with the person that's bringing them back. Think the skeletons and necromancers in the Dark Souls 1 catacombs. That's a lot of times I've brought up Dark Souls 1 today. Anyway, once you get past that and the satellite lasers from the nearby amygdalas, it's really not that bad. Speaking of this area not being too bad, it's not long before I make it back to the area from before where I was locked up. Since I have progressed the night far enough by staring at the copy of Blood Moon earlier, this place has opened up considerably, as well as having new enemy placements to boot. This is immediately noticeable when I am jumped by 3 hunters. Now, the only reason I am not absolutely losing my mind at this gang fight is due to a few reasons. 1. None of them have any sidearms that can parry me, so I am free to slash away without the fear of having one of their hands implanted into my ribcage. 2. Compared to the last hunter fight we fought for Eileen, they are neither as tough nor have any blood vials, so they can't draw the fight out longer than necessary. And 3. Stairs. Truly the only advantage you need when fighting other NPC hunters. And I'm not even kidding. Outside, and I can finally head through the door that was locked earlier and fight my way through the streets to the next boss fight. Or, I could do that, but I decided to use the powers of bath teleportation to help get the drop on them instead. Doing this, I ended up getting incredibly lucky when this seemingly random encounter ends up dropping my 8th and final bloodstone chunk, getting the axe to its penultimate upgrade until I find one of those exceedingly rare blood rocks. That's about all I need from this part of the town, so I just dash for the boss, and it's an interesting first encounter. Visually, one of my favourites, even if it does look like a rejected Dead Space enemy. Regardless, I try to ignore him and head straight for the spiral staircase in the back, but as luck would have it, he is somehow fast enough to cut me off, and then due to a mix of the camera noping out of there and him doing something, I am butchered within seconds. Certainly the most embarrassing first attempt at a boss so far. Next try, and he does not deny me access like an overly aggressive bouncer, and I'm able to ascend to my first targets. Yeah, it's one of those boss fights where the real challenge is the extra enemies peppered around the arena. Did you know that the one Reborn boss fight is in fact a recreation of the Tower Knight encounter in Demon Souls? The major difference being the one Reborn doesn't have weak ankles and can just be attacked anywhere for good damage. Well, actually, that being said, striking his legs does cause him to fall over and allows you to get some direct hits on his head. If I had just kept hacking away with light attacks instead of going for the heavy here, I probably could have done more damage in the long run, but ah well. At this point, I wasn't able to knock him down again, but circling and slashing was doing the trick just fine, so I won't complain. He only really got one solid attack off on me before his demise, so yeah, another simple enough fight if you disregard that first abysmal attempt. Past the arena, we can head up some stairs, and after inspecting this mummy, can be transported back to school. Well, thankfully, we are in and out of there in just a few seconds, although I do get to confront Spider Patches for trying to shove me to my death earlier. We're all good, I think. Much like before, we go through a door and find ourselves transported to a new location. Not the frontier this time, but rather the nightmare of Memphis, Tennessee. As you might expect, it's the absolute pits. It's a weird difficulty spike here compared to the rest of the game, plus there is this giant ominous light that is just rapidly killing 16 so long as it has a line of sight on him. We put it on the back burner briefly as the final optional area in the game is now within our grasp, and I've travelled everywhere else, so I may as well knock this one off the list too. Back up the lift at the chapel, only this time we now have the key to go through the door at the tip top of the Hunter's Workshop, and this is where the true nightmare begins. Not in terms of a difficulty spike or anything like that, these little giblets couldn't stop me if they tried. No, but this is when Bloodborne decides to finally take the plunge into its horror elements in a way as opposed to just dipping its toes from time to time. Firstly, we are greeted by not just one, but multiple of my favourite little creatures, so that already sets me off. But, following that, we can see more of the beast wolves from the beginning, now scaled up to late game enemies. Also, to top it off, they smash the nearby chandelier, so the entire area is engulfed in darkness. I can deal with most of these threats thanks to the power of stair technology, but one thing I cannot get back is the years off my life that this jump scare more than likely stole. I knew it was coming, I always try and prepare myself for it, but like an idiot, I was trying to sort out my next Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough with a friend, and of course, it was at that exact moment that the big bad wolf revealed himself. Well, thankfully, I do manage to kill him, and after a bit more exploration, I can find the keys to open the door and save myself from the abyss. Through the doors, we grab a new emote, that being the Make Contact. Not important yet, but we will use it for something optional in a bit if I remember. Up next, however, one of the easiest boss encounters in the game. Hell, probably the whole Souls series. It's a fight against a mob of enemies that continuously respawn. The catch is that one of them is the boss itself, and you need to of course kill it to win the fight and stop the others from coming back. The way to figure out which one is the big cheese is whichever one is continuously backing away from you and being all around quite passive. It doesn't take long to thin out the horde, given that wide sweeping arcs are this weapon's strong suit, which makes it an absolute beast at taking out multiple squishy enemies at once. After he is down below half, he decides to grow 3 sizes this day, but it's honestly too little too late. The small AoE he does whenever he transforms is honestly more beneficial to us than him, given that it also blasts away all his little helpers, leaving him quite open to Lincoln's counterattack. I suppose he gets more aggressive in this form, in that he fights back, but with such little health left and such slow, lumbering movements, he doesn't manage to land a hit, allowing us to easily secure the win. There is a reason, I think, why this boss is so weak though, despite it not being accessible this late in the run. While it looks like a dead end, in truth it hides a more difficult boss that waits only a few feet away. See, by smashing this nearby window, we can reach the area above the Vicar Amelia fight from earlier. By following the path ahead, we are led to a nearby elevator that goes down quite a bit, much further down than the first floor. Upon exiting, we can see that the church is hiding a big old squid jellyfish monster in the back. Don't forget to check in with your local churches to make sure they remember to feed their Lovecraftian horde they keep in the basement. They can be so easily overlooked. So, I barely remember much of this boss, other than I had a difficult time with it all those years ago. That said, I feel like I have improved as a Souls player in the last 5 years, and I know for a fact I was nowhere near as aggressive during my first Bloodborne playthrough, and that's probably where most of my shortcomings lied with that initial run. This is my way of telling you that by adopting a let's rock style mentality of rushing in and just going toe to toe and blow for blow with Ebrietas, I was able to completely dominate the fight. It's obvious, given the absolute size of her noggin, that her head is most definitely her weak spot. The game even targets it when you lock on. Not that you'd want to, as I learned rather quick, as it is by far easier to dodge everything she throws at you by just rolling out of the way while unlocked. Again, with the head being such an obvious weak point, it's where I tried to focus most of my damage. Hitting the head was simpler than I thought. I guess I shouldn't be surprised at this point, given how many vertical slashes the axe has in both of its movesets. Turns out the simple act of hitting the thing can cause her to momentarily be thrown off balance, therefore leading to more hits, and within time, an easy visceral. The illustrious combo of the stun into guard break into visceral happened at seemingly the perfect moment, as it was right as she dropped the half, allowing for the visceral to take her to around a third. This meant that whenever she recovered, she seemed to go right into her animation for her phase transition. However, when she does this, she once again lowers her head, allowing for a lot of maximum damage. I even managed to get in a charge heavy for good measure, and to flex. By the time she was done, she had so little health left that even though she managed to grand slam me with her gargantuan 5-head, I was able to strike her at the same time with another heavy, bringing her within kill range. And so, before she could even recover from her mild concussion, I severed what was left of her life completely, resulting in an easy, albeit incredibly satisfying victory for me. Back to the nightmare, and like I said, everything here hits like a truck. Not to mention, upon death, some of the enemies burst with those goddamn worms from Cainhurst, and just like before, they use Lincoln's body like a teething ring. Given that they've been my downfall before, you might be thinking that once we're past the worms, that it's smooth sailing. Wrong. Rock plus gravity equals dead president. Overcoming that, which to be fair is as simple as not walking into it, and we are assaulted once more by spiders. Not the ones from the ROM fight with the thick skulls, these ones do take full frontal damage. However, much like those other spiders, they can still mess your day up in mere moments. Exhibit A. Well, at least after the spiders it's relatively smooth sailings up to the next boss.
Cosmo, do you hear our prayers? Why is he in a cage?
Introducing Micolash, a boss that can either be a straightforward jog through some hallways, followed by a pretty simple hunter fight, or a complete nightmare-hurting minigame as you chase around a screaming madman who can seemingly explode your mind with his magical celestial powers. Fortunately for me this go around, it was the former. I'm not really sure which way you're supposed to run in this fight at the start, but almost immediately upon entering the boss area, he just ran straight past me into the ring where you duke it out. Fighting Micolash is comparable to that random hunter fight right before Rom. He has both the homing projectile move and the instant tentacle tickle at his disposal. Given his boss status, getting hit by either of them is going to hurt immensely. I got both insanely unlucky and lucky at the same time when he managed to stun me with one when I was turning around. The lucky part being he thankfully did not follow up with a visceral to end the fight. Taking out the couple of ads in the room allows us to focus on him, and once I do, he begins to crumble. All he does is back away and try the tentacle move whenever he sees an opening. Problem for him is that the startup is slow enough that I can easily just dodge out of the way and then punish him due to the recovery. When he drops to half, he seemingly dies, but it's all just a trick. He is now on the upper level of the arena, so I must make my way up there and wrangle him once more to continue the fight. I would like to note that throughout me climbing the tower, he keeps chiming in from time to say the odd thing. What really throws me for a loop though is this one scream, because all I can hear is Wallace. Once I get the drop on him, literally, we commence with phase 2. He is more aggressive now using that ranged ability I mentioned, as well as just trying to punch me. It's not like he's packing knuckle dusters or anything, no, it's just his bare hands, so as you can see, the damage is pitiful at best. The fight was truly over for him the moment I realised that the gun could interrupt his casting. Like, ask yourself, what can he truly do in this situation? Well, dodge would be the answer, but instead he figures punching is a good idea, which then leads into a visceral, more damage, and a swift death. With Micolash down, it's a straight shot to what can potentially be the final boss. Although I can now go get the Blood Rock to get the plus 10. Alright, so getting the Blood Rock is rather simple. It's just underneath that big thing that was killing me earlier, simply by looking at it. This is achieved by pulling a conveniently placed lever and watching it fall to its doom. All we have to do is roll through the window! Roll through the window! Avoid some more of those nightmare fuels from before, and bada bing, bada boom, Blood Rock! If you are curious, the brain thing ain't dead. By taking a lift in the area just before Micolash that is now opened up, we can descend into the deepest part of the tower, where it is simply sitting there, staring. Shit gives me goosebumps. Well, this is also where we make use of the Make Contact emote. Simply use the emote while facing the brain, wait a full minute for your arms to rotate to the other side, and you will get the tier 3 Moon Rune. It simply grants more echoes per kill. It's good, but not worthwhile to us at this point. Right, with a fully upgraded axe, we made our way to the final fight with Murgo's Wet Nurse. Things are off to a good start. Try not to sound too surprised, but I do good damage with my fully upgraded axe. I know, who would have guessed? I'm clearly a little rusty on the strats for this one though, as I began by constantly trying to avoid her attacks by dodging to my right, which every single time was essentially having me shove my face straight into her many blades. This followed up by that move where she darkens the arena and summons a clone of herself for about 30 seconds, and yeah, it goes poorly for old Abe. Well, we brought a friend along to the next try, and it was good old RNG. Knowing that right dodges were a death sentence, I just got out of the way of everything by dodging to the left. Everything was sidestepped by doing this, and allowing for a lot of counterattacks while she was stuck in her animations. Now, the rotating, swinging General Grievous blades were deadly all around, so when she started doing that, I decided to just play it safe and back off. Could I have gotten in close and poked her with the halberd form? More than likely, yeah, but things were going so well, I didn't want to risk messing up. Besides, should she start doing this while I'm hurt, the move lasts so long that I can get in a free heal if needs be. Now, I mentioned RNG being the big factor to doing so well this time, and just what did I mean by that, you may ask? Well, as it turns out, the move where she summons the clone isn't some surefire thing she does at set points. So in other words, I lucked out extremely hard by her not choosing to do that move. As you can imagine, this led me to get into a good rhythm with the boss, and before you know it, the nightmare was slain. All that was left was return to the Hunter's Dream, which has certainly seen better days, and face the true final boss. But there is the matter of DLC, and after all, these Lincoln runs do tend to end up being full runs, including most of, if not all of the DLCs. I make my way back to the amygdala near the chapel and wait in the spot where I first retrieved my hat. It seems Lincoln's travelling through time and space must have left some sort of residual power in his hat, because when grabbed here, we are sent back in time. Or we're supposed to be? Alright, as it turns out, I did not have the DLC. Took me a moment to realise, but I'm actually playing this off the free PlayStation Plus version, which is just the base game without the old Hunters add-on. My copy of the game with all the DLC on disc is back in my parents' house, which is about a 2 to 3 hour round trip. If you think this is my way of bailing on the DLC, you are mistaken. I am just explaining to you that I have owned the DLC in the past, but I am buying it again for this run because I am beyond invested at this stage. Oh, what do you know, 50% off at the moment as well. Wanna know what's funny? With it being half price, that technically makes this a cheaper alternative than simply retrieving my old copy. The train ride back to my parents will cost me about 11 quid, whereas at least this way it's only $7.99. My role model is Mr. Krabs. Anyway, once we do get rightfully transported on our second attempt, as mentioned, we are seemingly sent back in time, as we are clearly in the same area around the chapel where we have spent so much of our time. It doesn't take long before we are greeted by our first new enemy type, Old Hunters. At least that's the name of the DLC, and therefore what I have always called them. They hit quite hard and have a good chunk of health to boot. Fortunately, I made the wise decision of making this my penultimate adventure before tackling the final bosses, so I too am rather formidable. Helping greatly is the fact that they can be parried quite easily, especially these ones with the large whip weapons. So long as you fight them one at a time and don't let them gang up on you, you're usually okay to go. A nice thing about them is the fact that they are still hunters, even if they are hostile to you. This means that they will attack and kill any beast that they come across. So sometimes it's often beneficial to just sit back and watch the show until they have cleared out the way for you. Making our way to the Cathedral where we once encountered Amelia, we can see another new enemy, which seems like the executioners from the start of the game, only they have been pumped full of roid juice. I get my head near taken off the instant I am within cleaving range. Luckily for us, I got a shot off at the last second apparently, as I managed to parry him. I recover fast enough for the visceral and then quickly follow that up with a fully charged swing that drops him low enough to finish him off with a few more strikes. Making our way inside, we meet the flaming hot variant of the Cleric Beast just chilling in the back of the room. We can't do anything with him yet, but we can retrieve an eyeball from his hand, so that's something I suppose. Heading out and down this path leads to what seems like a brand new area. There isn't much time to admire the scenery, mind you, as we are assaulted by turrets. Yeah, this entire section is just filled with turrets facing different directions that will ruin your whole day within seconds if they catch you. The saving grace here is that they're completely stationary, and therefore it's just a matter of staying out of their direct line of fire to get close enough to dismantle them. My luck shines through once more when I somehow forgot one of them when engaging one of the nearby infected humans. Somehow, the entire barrage of bullets managed to skim just right past Lincoln's mutton chops without leaving him so much of a scratch. Thank God for the President's incredibly small hitbox. Further down, we learn that some of the basic enemies now have timed thrown explosives, which honestly sounds worse than it is. Really, they're easier to dodge than those that hurl the Molotovs. More importantly, another big bad hunter fight, this one wields the boom hammer. A weapon that just speaks to me as I love both elements going on with that thing, plus it sounds like something you'd find in Gears of War and that makes me happy. Further on, we find an NPC fight. Again, not my strong suit, but the odds are in my favour as he doesn't have a gun. It's kind of wild when you think about it how much the difficulty curves on these fights, depending on whether or not the hunters are packing heat. Much like Micolash, with no way for him to parry me, there was nothing stopping me from just never letting up my assault, or once more, bullying him into a corner with a couple of shotgun blasts. Following the main path, then it's more of the same. Hunters, beasts, dogs, and one of those executioners from before, only this one brought an anti-air cannon with him. I survive the encounter somehow and continue to slaughter. Except for this man, he gets to live, because yeah, I get it. Turns out he serves as a warning as he is right outside our first boss fight of the DLC, that being Ludwig, the epitome of what happens when the crazy horse girl goes a little too far. I had a basic strategy of trying to get as many hits in as possible on his head when I could and then backing off. Sounds a bit simple, and it is, but there's a reason for that you will see shortly. For once, striking the head doesn't really require any specific moves, as during the first phase, Ludwig tends to keep that thing rather close to the ground, making it harder to not hit it if we're being real. He inflicts decent damage when he gets me, but I can also dish it right back, which leads to good health recovery on my end. When he begins to get a bit more erratic, the situation looks dire. In fact, I'll say it how it is, I should have died during this entire exchange, as I don't believe for a second that this attack did not hit me while I was in the healing animation. Well, as they say, never look a gift horse in the mouth, especially if that horse is 15 feet tall and trying to find out what your skin might taste like. Near the end of phase 1, I finally land enough damage on the head for him to be opened up for a visceral. Sadly, I'm at his backside when this happens, so knowing there probably wouldn't have been enough time to get around to the front to do so, I just settled for a charged heavy. The damage may not be as good, but I'll take it. This leads into phase 2, where he decides to weaponize fan service by whipping out the Moonlight Greatsword from somewhere. It certainly wasn't in the arena beforehand. This is secretly a good thing because most bosses tend to start in a semi-sane state and then slowly devolve into insanity via stage 2. Ludwig is the opposite, but to me what that also means is that phase 2 is miles easier than phase 1. I don't know if it's just that I find it much easier to read his sword swings, but the difficulty really does feel like I just dropped like a rock after that transition. Mind you, I'm glad, and besides, it's still a cool fight. Anyway, I just spend most of my time dodging to the left, as to be honest, it hasn't failed me yet. The deadliest attack in his arsenal is probably his charge, given how quick it is, so I suppose I can breathe a sigh of relief that he only tried it once when he murdered the random NPC that is in the room with us. Whenever there was an opening, I just tried to do as much transformed combos as possible for their good damage and stagger build-up. In fact, I was able to break his guard twice. The first time I was able to get the visceral off, whereas the second happened when he was so close to death that I honestly wouldn't have even noticed if not for the sound cue, as I just kept slashing until I'd won the fight. Now, remember what I said about not really having a plan going in? Well, this is why. This is my first time properly tackling the DLC. The furthest I had ever got before was to Ludwig, but I never beat him. I was woefully underleveled and I planned to come back after the base game. However, upon defeating the final bosses in Bloodborne, you are immediately thrust into New Game Plus without the option to refuse. So I just never got around to doing it. So yeah, from this point on, it's also a somewhat blind run of the DLC. I say somewhat because I know who the rest of the bosses are, I've just never fought them myself or seen the areas in between. Also, for those of you wondering, I told Ludwig the truth about his hunters, even if it wasn't what he wanted to hear, and then I put him out of his misery like the crippled racehorse that he was. Heading into completely new territory, and it's a prison. Can't do much right now as everything is locked, so all we can do is continue to the next room where things get dicey. Let's not sugarcoat it, it's a 2v1 hunter fight and they beat the snot out of me. They'd be easy enough on their own, but their two different playstyles complement each other perfectly. One is a fast sword user and the other is a magic slinging sniper, for lack of a better way to put it. First death is mostly due to me forgetting how weapon transforming works. See, if you dodge and then immediately press the transform button, you won't just change your weapon after the dodge, rather your hunter will do a transform attack as if it were a combo. This can be handy for quick damage after a dodge. Here though, it caused me to slam the axe into the ground, which led to a longer recovery before my next dodge, which led to my face getting disintegrated. Two more deaths, which I will save you the over explanations. Both these demises can be chalked up to some good old panic rolling. My most brain dead play ended up with me coming out on top. I quite literally just sprinted straight for the mage, caring not for my safety, as I just started getting as many hits as I could before the sword user appeared. I hid behind the back of the lift, and this caused the melee fighter to come in close, whereas the mage one backed off. It all seems to have messed with her AI somewhat, as she just kept blasting the statues I was hiding behind as opposed to repositioning herself to get a clear shot. This allowed me to very easily win a one-on-one with the sword girl. Would like to mention that the ground here is slightly uneven, as even though I managed to parry her multiple times, I was never able to follow up with the visceral. I still won the fight, but it was certainly nerve-wracking at the time. After she's dead, I turn my eyes on the ranged fighter, and now it is time for me to bully. Without her sidekick to beat me away, she is all but powerless to stop the assault. She gets one hit in with her whip near the end, but the damage is laughable. With them dead, I then take the eye that I got from that crispy fried demon back in the Cathedral, casually insert it into the head of this here skeleton, and as you would expect, that kicks the elevator into high gear, taking us to the next level, both figuratively and literally. As this is a Souls game we are playing here, I make sure to go back down and then send the lift up without me, and sure enough, there's a bottom part I would have missed otherwise. From this, we retrieve the key item of Lawrence's skull, and then continue back up to where we left off. The next area is this massive research hall that is filled with squishy enemies and involves a lot of running upstairs, opening doors, falling down to lower areas to open up more doors, all to make a somewhat cohesive path to the top so we can open the next door to the next area. I'm going to level with you, this video is going on way longer than I initially wanted it to. I guess I just wanted to talk about Bloodborne. But in the interest of saving even a little of your time and mine, we are just going to jump ahead to the next boss, because if we're being real, you are not missing much in listening to me explain how I explored this area for the first time. The only thing this led to was I accidentally entered the boss area ahead of time before I was prepared, and as a result, kinda got blindsided into an early grave. Next try, once I managed to make my way back to the area that is, and it's night and day when compared to the first attempt. Turns out each of these living failures, that's not me being mean, it's what they're called, turns out they don't have much health, so focusing on cutting down one and keeping the amount of them in the fight at once low is the easiest way to go about this. Now, as they are constantly spawning, I do still have to be mindful not to get bitch slapped from off screen again, as while they are easy to avoid and predict, I still need to be careful as apparently a few slaps are all it takes to knock me out for the count. I think you can prime them for a visceral with a charged R2, but I was never able to get the angle just right. Granted, the damage the fully charged attack inflicted normally left them in a state where a few more slices would take them out anyway, so it didn't matter all that much. When they get to around half, they seem to get access to a new move where they begin praying to the heavens, causing rocks, I think, to rain from the sky. This is one of the few things I have seen before, so I at least knew that the best way to avoid it is to just position yourself correctly behind the wall of sunflowers in the centre of the arena and wait for it to pass. When they attempt this for the second time, I am a tad greedy and run out and try and get what I thought would be some free hits on them. And while that is the case, I am also cracked right in the head with one of those falling boulders. At the very least, I was able to take out that particular failure, and now as they were so low, I just healed up and then quickly rushed whatever one was closest and dealt enough damage to fully deplete their health bar and win the fight. There's no rest for us yet, it seems, as the very next boss is in literally the next room. And while it may be a bit early to say because this is my first time ever fighting her, I think Maria here might be my favourite boss fight in Bloodborne. That probably sounds odd considering throughout this run I have mentioned how much I just do not vibe with the Hunter NPC fights, but I don't know what to tell you. I never got frustrated with this fight, even after dying like 4 times. To be fair, she doesn't fight like an NPC, nor does she react like they do, but at its core, it is a Hunter fight. I kinda surprised myself with how well I was doing on my first attempt. I managed to get her to her second phase without too much trouble, even managed to land a decent parry and a visceral. I consider that in and of itself a win, as I was never expecting to beat her on this attempt, and was simply trying to learn her patterns. Phase 2 begins with an AoE blood explosion. Figured that was going to be the case when I was attacking her and she stopped flinching. I probably didn't need to back up as much or as soon as I did, and could have done more damage, but better safe than sorry. In the next phase, her range seems to increase quite a bit, so backing off is no longer an option. However, she does still have some attacks with overly long windups, leading to some more easy parries. This eventually leads to her final trick, a third phase, which is kinda like a desperation attack, given how low her health it has to be before she activates it. At this stage, she adds multi-hitting fire attacks into her arsenal, and I just straight up had no clue how to deal with that, and as a result, she cremated me not long after the phase began. I could be annoyed by how close I got her on the first try, only to come up short, but again, I was enjoying the boss too much to really care. Next try is about as well as the first, just with a few more parries in phase 1 and less damage taken overall. The downfall here was that I was nowhere near aggressive enough in phase 3 and stayed too far away, resulting in her taking advantage of this by two-shotting me with her enhanced ranged abilities. Attempts 3 and 4 were much the same, failing to learn and capitalise openings when they were clearly available to me. The fourth attempt was so much worse than the 3 that came before, I don't know what happened. I didn't even get her to her final phase, it was embarrassing. As for attempt number 5, now I haven't done this yet in the video, but I'm just going to show you the entire fight unedited and you'll understand why. Other than going hitless and landing 100% of my viscerals, I don't think I could have asked for that fight to go any better. Picking up the celestial dial that is now spawned in, I can hold it up where Maria was sitting and watch in awe as not only does the clock tower open, but in doing so, it creates a pathway to the final area of the DLC, the fishing hamlet. Sadly, we are not here to relax and fish. As you can imagine, we are assaulted by grotesque fishmen instead. They hit hard but are easy enough to dodge and don't have much health to boot, so we can manage our way through the village easy enough. The only major roadblocks are the land sharks. Not only are they gargantuan in size, but as you might expect, they hit with the force of 1,000 suns. That said, they are also shockingly quick on their feet, which certainly took me by surprise. Not helping matters was the fact that I had missed 2 of the little fish boys, so they were also slashing at my ankles throughout the entire encounter. For once, rapidly panic rolling saves the day against all odds. When the small fry are out of the way, I can focus on the shark. I think I can parry him, but to be honest, I'm far too scared to try. I think he'll eat me. The only thing that saved me during all of this was using the well in the centre of town to split them up, which is incredibly ironic when you consider down said well is what is often considered to be one of the most difficult enemy encounters in the game, seeing how you must fight 2 highly aggressive sharks in a small area. I know this from a few others who have warned me about it, plus I jumped down and attempted to fight a few times here for good measure, and that went about as well as you might think. Further on in, I am greeted by weird fish dogs, no more deadly than normal dogs as far as I'm concerned. That still makes them annoying to deal with, mind you. There's also this hunter that keeps spawning in set places around the map. He gets me good the first time by surprise, but every other encounter has him eating dirt. All of this is incredibly inconsequential for what awaits us at the end of the road. I may never have played this part of the DLC before, but I know the horror that is the Orphan of Kos. Truthfully, I was equal parts excited and nervous to face him. This video was already taking longer than planned to wrap up, and the idea of being stuck for hours in what was once considered the hardest Souls boss of all time was a tad worrying. However, me and the President are incredibly eager to test his mettle. Entering the arena, and we quite literally watch this dude get birthed, and the very first thing he decides to do with the miracle of life is weaponize his yo-yo ass placenta and start wailing on the very first person who came to greet him. This would be like if a baby decided to throw hands with a doctor in the delivery room. Anyway, when it begins, he starts flipping, whipping and dipping all over the arena, and at a speed that is rather intimidating compared to what we have fought up to this point. Not helping matters as he hits like a freight train hooked up to a jet engine, so a single mistake and I may as well start using the top hat to dig my own grave. To be fair, no one said I had to start the fight in the most ballsy way by attempting to parry his lunge attack. Granted, it worked, but I was slow on the trigger, and the trade was 100% not worth the flex. His range is deceptively long, or at least I thought so. Took me a while to get a grasp on the whole my weapon is attached to a piece of string and I'm gonna toss that shit willy-nilly playstyle that he was incorporating whenever I even thought about closing the gap. Much like Maria, my first few attempts at the fight were all about learning patterns and parry windows. The only thing I was shooting in these attempts was my own foot. With his gold medal in Leapfrog, the Orphan had a bad habit of jumping straight over Lincoln's head during the fight. This was great as his recovery left a lot to be desired and allowed for easy backstabs, once I got the timing right that is. First couple attempts ended prematurely just before the halfway mark, so phase 2 was still mostly a mystery. On the bright side, because I need to find some sort of shining light in this darkness, I was getting him to this point without wasting many blood vials, so at least I don't need to worry about running out in the fight if I continue to pace myself as I have been. Bullets were another story, but what can you do? The third attempt was off to a fantastic start. Not only did I realise that if I positioned myself just right, I could probably hit him with a guard break on his buttocks and open them up for a visceral straight away. It didn't happen in this attempt, but a few moments later the opportunity did present itself and I was able to finally land one. 2014, good year. I was 16 and had no clue what to do with my life. Good times. Things were going well this time, all things considered. Yeah, I was getting hit a lot more than the previous attempts, but I was also dishing out more pain. In fact, this was when I got him down to phase 2 for the first time. He gets taller, sprouts some pathetic little wings, and seems to get more projectile moves. Was not aware of that, and he kills me with them. Many more attempts followed, all of varying degrees of success. The less we talk about attempt 6, the better. Oof. So, after a total of 10 deaths, we get run 11. Phase 1 goes about as well as it has been previously. However, I made one major change to my playstyle, and that was to stop trying to parry so much. The damage is nice if you can land it, yeah, but after 10 tries, I figured that I was probably getting hit more often than not. And besides, it's not like this is Sekiro, I don't have to get good at parrying, I can simply dodge. which I'm at least competent at for the first phase. That's not to say I didn't land viscerals, of course I did, I just only triggered the guard breaks with the charged R2s whenever he bounced over me. In fact, one of these viscerals is what pushed him into phase 2. It's also where I learned he has a non-lethal shockwave that pushes you back upon transforming. My goal now was to try and stick as close to him as possible, obviously to hit him, but also to hopefully discourage him from using his ranged moves, as that's what I was having the most trouble with still. I don't know whether this is considered good RNG or not, so someone is going to have to enlighten me in the comments, but for whatever reason he seemed entirely obsessed with just spamming this one airborne slam move over and over again. It could have something to do with the fact that he did catch me with it more times than he should have, but I'll take the repeated use of this over his annoying sticky ball toss any day. I continued to stick to my guns, which is ironic given that I was trying not to shoot him, no matter how tempting the openings may have looked. This part of the fight basically all came down to a war of attrition. I'd slice him, he'd pancake me, then I'd retreat to heal while he lined up his next orbital strike. It felt like it lasted an eternity, but looking back at the recording, the whole thing was only about 5 minutes max. The most important part of all to me was making sure I always stayed as close to full health as possible, just in case he whipped out something I wasn't prepared for. I enjoyed having the extra safety cushion, as it were. In the final moments of the fight, I was down to my last 3 vials, but he was also ridiculously close to death. So, throwing caution to the wind, I tried to run in and get the final few hits off, but I was not so lucky and ended up getting whacked multiple times. Mr. President wasn't dead yet, however, so it was 2 more vials directly into the veins and time to try again. I take a few more swings at him and I got greedy, therefore he took to the skies once more before I could finish him off. I somehow did not anticipate this and as a result was stuck in my attacking animation, meaning I got slammed before I could dodge. At this very moment I made the split-second decision to go in for the rally attack to get my health back as opposed to healing with my last vial. For maximum health regain I went with the transform combo of R1, L1, R1, L1. To say this was the right play would be a massive understatement. Not only does it heal me right back up, but the resulting combo is just enough to take off the last of the orphan's health, winning me the fight. That was tough. Fun, but tough. Super glad I finally beaten him though. Well, actually not quite. I had to go over to the thing they crawled out of and attack the shadowy ghost form of himself to truly slaughter the Nightmare and finish the Old Hunters DLC. Well, that's a lie, there's still Lawrence. Yeah, so if we take that skull we got at the bottom of the lift back to the extra spicy cleric, we get an optional boss fight with Lawrence the First Vicar. I thought he would just be a tougher reskin of the Cleric Beast, and well, that's only partly true. He is mostly the same other than he hits harder. Although, unlike the first beast, he has a second phase where his legs explode and he begins sadly crawling around the church, all the while spewing lava from his torso. The biggest hurdle here is making sure not to step in the lava or get in the way of his aggressive charging baby crawl. Both will just annihilate your life in seconds. Happened to me on more than one occasion. The real trick to winning was just hit and run tactics and always trying to stay on the right side of his body, or at least that's what worked for me. I would like to go into more details about this fight as truthfully he killed me almost as many times as the Orphan, but other than just avoiding those 2 previously mentioned moves, there's not much else to this fight. I just really sucked at getting out of the way of them, plus I had bad pathing and kept walking into his lava splooge like a fool. Alright, now the DLC is done. Future Nerbit here, not important, but I forgot to mention that I went and got all the weapons and talked with all the NPCs so that I could get every last one of the DLC trophies. I think it's about time to end this, and it's kind of anticlimactic. Don't get me wrong, the final boss is cool, but compared to what I just went through in the DLC, it's much easier than the last couple of bosses I had to deal with. This was the problem in Dark Souls 1 as well, as it too didn't let you free roam after the final bosses, meaning you had to fight the likes of Artorias, Manus and Calamite before Gwyn, which meant the game's difficulty fell off a cliff. Not to say I perfected this fight, far from it, but I've also beaten the game at least once before, so I know roughly what I'm in for with old Gehrman here. I believe he gets more moves between his phases, but honestly I didn't notice much other than him doing more damage and not flinching. Unlike the Orphan, I was able to comfortably land parries on Gehrman. Probably helps that by now I have fought enough hunters to just have a basic grasp of when to fire to open them up. Just a few viscerals and it's night-night for Gehrman. At this moment, the moon presence descends from, I assume, the moon, and embraces me to have Lincoln become the next guy just like Gehrman was. Psych, guess who decided to have 3 helpings of fried calamari before the boss fight, you spindly prick? Much the same, I am overprepared, overleveled, and well over the word cap I set for myself on this script, so the fight goes as follows. I stay mostly locked off for the entirety of the fight as I find it works better for longer beast type enemies such as him. By continually rolling around him and attacking almost non-stop, he rarely seems to find the opportunity to fight back. He manages to scurry away on a few occasions and does this move that seems more threatening than it really is. He'll make this high-pitched noise and then glow, which causes you to drop to 1 HP no matter where you are. Again, that sounds terrifying, but here's the issue. All the damage it inflicts is recoverable with the rally feature. He is also locked into doing this glowy eye thing for about 5 to 7 seconds. This is more than enough time to do a simple transforming weapon combo to regain all of your health and then get some free damage to boot. I think you might even be able to bait him into doing this attack as well. See, at one point he started summoning blood to rain down from the sky. Naturally, I don't want any of that on my clothes as it's pretty sticky and gross, so I back off. Once there is a sizable distance between us, he once more uses the move. By doing so, he seals his fate as I'm able to close the gap, get my health back, and then continue the onslaught for long enough to take away the last of his life, winning the fight. In the aftermath of the fight, I am gifted 230,000 echoes for our New Game Plus run, and most importantly of all, Lincoln is now a squid. Squid Lincoln! Woo!